guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be beginning a new mini-series called the Rotation Diaries. Essentially, I spent 2 years in the hospital system doing different rotations every couple of weeks, and my experiences varied a fair bit. Basically, as I went through my rotations as a junior doctor, I kept thinking to myself that it was really interesting hearing the experiences of those who came before me. So I've kind of used that concept and spun it into what now is known as the Rotational Diaries, where every week I'll be aiming to go through one of my rotations with you, telling you about when I did it, what it was like, the highlights, the lowlights, and trying to find actual diary entries that I kept during that time to give you an idea of what my mindset was like at the time. If you're interested, please keep an eye out. I'm going to be aiming to post one every week, but we'll see how life goes. Without further ado, we begin with the very first rotation I did as a junior doctor, the intensive care unit. So my journey as a junior doctor, or an intern, started in January of 2017. My very first rotation was in the intensive care unit at the hospital where I did my medical school as well. So whilst it was an intimidating shift, I'd luckily already met most of the people I was about to work with. The intensive care unit is, as the name suggests, pretty intense as a junior doctor. My rotation through the intensive care unit was a 10-week rotation, and it was based in shift work. So essentially you could have a morning shift, which I think was 8 till 4:30, and the afternoon shift, which was midday to 8 p.m, or an evening shift where you started at, I think it was 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. and you ended at 8 the next morning. Now, I'm going to be explaining a couple of things and then put in a little text detail so I don't ramble on too much. So if you're not familiar with certain terminologies or your hospital system doesn't use the same words mine did, then we'll try and figure it out together. So what was my role? My role as an intern was to get a lot of the information together for the team and put it into what we called a handover sheet. So patient X in bed Y has come in with this and this is the treatment so far, so on and so forth. My job was also to, during the ward rounds, where the team would go from bed to bed and meet the patients and determine the course of action for the next day, and I drove what was called the computer on wheels. So I had the chart open and I would be taking the notes as well as yelling out, the blood results for this, or yes, I'll order that, and that sort of thing. Mind you, 2017 was kind of a transitional year for my health system, where we went from paper to computer based. So there was a lot of in between. So I did a lot of requesting things on paper, but some on the computer and so forth. So it's kind of confusing. It was a confusing year for a lot of reasons. So after ward rounds, which would typically go until about 10 a.m, so for 2 hours or so, the team would get together and we delegate tasks. At this point, the consultant, who was the head, would normally go and do procedural things, so inserting long lines and that sort of thing, whilst the registrar would go and more often than not communicate with other teams. So in my intensive care unit, mine as if I owned it, so in the intensive care unit that I worked in, we would often accept a patient from another team, but we wouldn't take full ownership of that person because they were still part of the other team's care. So for example, if you had a severe pneumonia that required ventilation, you would come into the ICU, we would take care of the ventilation and do, antibiotics and that sort of thing. But our aim was always to give you back to the care of the team who admitted you under us to begin with. So the registrar would quite often be involved in a lot of that sort of discussion. What are your parameters? This is how she's going, that sort of thing. The registrar would also go and do a lot of consultation. So if another team, so say the surgical team, saw a patient and thought, ooh, I think this person might need intensive care, the registrar on my team would then go and basically assess and say yay or nay, call the consultant, and they would formulate a plan. So what did that leave for me, the intern, to do? A lot of paperwork. My time in intensive care was very much paperwork based, and I was pretty okay with that. Because it was my first rotation ever, the expectations of me were a little bit lower than say if I was at the end of my first year as a doctor in the intensive care unit, but it was very much an informative rotation regardless. So I would do a lot of the discharge paperwork, I do a lot of the corresponding with the general practitioners and the family members, and I got to go around and watch and learn. So in my ICU term, I learned how to do an arterial line, how to cannulate and how to cannulate well. I learnt, but I didn't do too many PICC lines and long lines like that. And I also learnt a lot about the intricacies of medicine. So as a general practitioner now, a lot of that knowledge is not applicable. I do not, and I hope I never need to know how to set up a ventilator, but back then I did, very, very briefly, in a very low level of detail, but that was the kind of experience that I was getting in my intensive care unit rotation. Like I mentioned, it was shift work based, and this was the first time I'd ever done shift work. And let me tell you, I was terrified. I was terrified. My life until then had always been Monday to Friday, 9 to, well, 5, I guess, but study would go later. And I'd never had to sleep during the day and stay awake completely at night. As an intern, the onus was not on me to keep people alive overnight at all. I always had a registrar with me, but oh my gosh, it was terrifying. I remember sitting there preparing for my very first night shift and trying to get tips from people. So if that's a video you'd like as well, let me know. When it comes to the highlights of my ICU term, I mean, there was a few. I remember speaking to a consultant and he asked me how long I'd been working, and I was able to spit out that I had been a doctor for 36 hours. And he laughed at me and said, "You'll stop counting soon enough." But the fact of the matter was, he asked me how long I was a doctor for, and that was so exciting to me. Now, if you've done an ICU term or you're about to, you may not be doing it as the very first thing you've ever done as a doctor, so that necessarily won't be a highlight to look forward to for you. I think one of the biggest highlights, aside from that for me, was feeling like I was part of the team and doing a lot of hands-on things. I did arterial lines, I did a PICC line, I did a lot of arterial blood gases, I helped intubate, I helped extubate, I did a lot of things that, I mean, it's critical care, and I'm an intern. Regardless of the fact I was also only 23 years old, turning 24. I was young and I felt, oh my gosh, I am a doctor. Because as an intern, when you're doing a lot of paperwork, it's very easy to feel like you're a glorified assistant. For some of it, you are, and that's part of your role, and that's completely okay. But I was very lucky in my term that I got hands-on experiences. I went to MET calls, which are essentially code blues, where someone was having a cardiac arrest or was significantly ill. And whilst I did not run them, do not get me wrong, I was most certainly very junior, I was involved. And having that intensive care experience meant that as I progressed and became more senior through medicine, I was a lot more comfortable with those sort of situations because I'd been through them on the other side, as it were, from the intensive care point of view. So it's definitely a good rotation to have under your belt if you have the opportunity. Mind you, I know that I'm very, very lucky that the hospital I was in offered this to interns at all, let alone let them do so much. So your results may vary. I have friends in tertiary centres who did an ICU rotation and did nothing but paperwork. And unfortunately, it is very hospital-based. As for the lowlights, I have a sad story, as you can imagine, in the intensive care unit. We had a gentleman, middle-aged, who we had no idea who he was. He came off a boat, a stowaway from overseas who didn't speak English, who came in essentially in a coma. And we intubated him, we took bloods, we did everything. And we very soon found out he had something called necrotizing fasciitis, or essentially a very, very, very bad infection. And he ended up dying. This, of course, is sad in itself, but what really struck me is I did the CPR. So it was a night shift. It was just me and a registrar in an intensive care unit that hosted, I think we had 12 patients. And I was the one that noticed his heart rhythm went out. And this is not to be like, oh, go me, but it's just the fact. I looked at him and went, doctor, my friend, that's not right. And then we rushed over and he essentially went, get on the chest. So I did, and I did CPR for several minutes. I'd never done CPR before, ever. On mannequins, yes, and on dummies, yes, but not on a person. But what was really nice is my consultant who was involved, so we called her, I think it was 3 o'clock in the morning. We called her, she drove in instantly and helped try to save this guy's life. She took me, the registrar, the nurses, the ward staff, everyone who was involved out, and we debriefed, and she let us cry and she let us vent our frustrations and how unfair the world is and how unfair it is that we had to do that at all. And then she helped us learn from it. And that's, again, another video topic if you're ever interested. But it's how to deal with that, with death in medicine. Our whole aim, typically, is to keep people alive and to keep their quality of life there. But inevitably, that comes with death too. So that was probably the lowest point on the rotation. But mind you, that's not to turn you off intensive care at all. My overall experience in the rotation was so positive. What I'd like to do next is to give you a couple of tips if you are starting an intensive care rotation. What do you take? What should you know? Because things vary so much, the biggest tip I can give you is be eager and be enthusiastic. Ask questions if you don't know. Say that you want experience and that you want to be hands-on. Make sure that you put your hand up to do things like the handover sheet before anyone has to ask you to do it. This shows that you're enthusiastic and means that people will slowly get to know you, build trust with you, and that you can then start to sort of work up those core skills and things. If you're not enthusiastic and you just do things because you're told to, very rarely are you going to have a fantastic time on any rotation. Mind you, even if you hate the rotation you're in, say it's intensive care and you want nothing to do with it, there's always something to be pulled out of it. So don't neglect a good rotation just because you're not interested. Find something to take out of it. I have a general sort of come prepared package that I recommend to interns, which is make sure you have coffee on you. So I drink sachet coffee sometimes, and that was really good to have on me. At least one muesli bar, if not more. Extra pens, highlighters, and if you're in a paper-based hospital system, have extra note paper. Radiology request forms, pathology request forms. Make sure you've got an updated list of all the numbers of the different registrars and who to call if you need this done and that done. People will look to you because you're the intern to know this sort of stuff, and it's really good if you have it. I had one of those clipboards that you could put stuff in and file it in the middle. So I would tape on the top bit when I opened it to have a look, all the numbers and names and things like that, and then in the compartment I'd have all my food as well as my paperwork, and that was really useful. Otherwise, in the intensive care rotation, study is very important if you're wanting to learn that sort of intricate side of it. But my rotation, because I was so junior and an intern, it wasn't expected of me. That being said, there is no harm in some extra study. So I'm going to read you a couple of diary entries that I've written from my time in the intensive care unit. The first one's dated the 19th of January 2017. Holy crap, I'm a doctor. I signed my first real medical chart and fluid order today, and I did my first echo referral. It just doesn't feel right. ICU seems a bit like retail. It all happens in waves. It's quiet for a while, hectic, and then really quiet. And there's so much paperwork. I knew as an intern I would be doing afternoons and night shifts, but I didn't expect it to be in my third week in intensive care. Yikes, this is baptism by fire. At least everyone seems nice. I'm scared, but I'm always scared before a big change. I cried when I went on and I listed a couple of places I've been, and in the end I realized that I had nothing to worry about. Surely this will be the same. I hate that when I get stressed I just can't stop. I guess when my brain is in a tiz, I look to get control by externally organizing a mess, almost like it's therapy. It's one of the only things that'll calm me down. This is the same thing with this mind dump of a diary. Mental vomit space, ha ha ha. There's so much paperwork involved with being an intern, I feel like I'm drowning. But I've made some nice new friends. 23rd of January. Oh my goodness, and that's another day done. I worked from 8 to 5, ICU, Dr. Kris. ICU intern, still doesn't sound right. It was a busy day. Handover, followed by a met call, a discharge, an admission, and a 5-hour ward round for 6 patients. What the heck? It wasn't bad, plus the other RMOs are nice and everyone kind of knew I was new, which lowered expectations. I think the consultant remembers me a little. She couldn't remember why and thought maybe I was her new registrar. Oh boy. Today was like being a medical student on steroids. Do the notes, order the things, get the bloods, fill the forms, chart the stuff and say I don't know like a million times. Like I said, it wasn't too bad. The ETT, which is a tube you put in when you intubate, was the most exciting thing, but it seemed more stressful than it could have or should have been. I know nothing about being an intensive care doctor. As long as all they need me to do is be secretarial, I'll be okay. My first night shift scares me. I didn't sign up for shift work. Yes, I did. I want to be a GP now, please. I'm going to bed. The 16th of March, 2017. ICU is going well. I'm getting really used to it now. I was initially apprehensive about doing lines, but now I'm sad I haven't done any more. I have just not had any chances. The new regs and it's luck with the draw. I started doing a clinical audit in my intensive care term, which was not necessary of me, I just sort of did it. So it's called the MET audit. The MET audit grand rounds tomorrow. I'm pooping myself. I hate public speaking and ad-libbing, but I can't really script this. Ugh, I can't wait for it to be over. So essentially after I did my audit, I submitted it and I got to present it at grand rounds. Grand rounds is where essentially every doctor in the hospital is invited to a discussion, and they usually have one speaker per grand round, and this week it was me as an intern. It's terrifying. And that's all the entries I had from the intensive care unit. So guys, this was it for the first edition of the Rotation Diaries. I hope you've learnt something. If you have questions about anything, my time in ICU, my time as an intern, what I did for night shifts, let me know. But until the next one guys, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you later. Bye.